I'm Diego Cordovez with Adam Schoenfeld. Welcome to another episode of The Scoop, brought to you by Full Tilt Poker. I like this one because it requires no introduction. Gus Hansen. So the World Series is underway, and in the first week, Eric Lindgren and David Singer both won bracelets, guys who were among the best players never to win a bracelet. You're the best player never to win a bracelet. You've won a lot of WPTs, big money, everything. Is it important to you to do it?
It's always been hyped up, the bracelet thing.
Yeah.
And to me, it's kind of like a poker tournament is a poker tournament. I just came in second in the World Poker Tour.
Mm-hmm. Final event.
In the final event. To win that one, I was looking to win. I came in second, still a very good result. But I mean, I'd rather take second or win that tournament than win the 10,000 mixed event here. I mean, I think it's a bigger accomplishment to win that event. So even though to win here would have given me a bracelet, and the other one would have given me a World Poker Tour bracelet. I mean, to me, it's a little bit hyped up, and I think
they give out bracelets like chiclets now.
Yeah, I mean, and really, the thing is, I'm not trying to diminish the legend of Doyle Brunson. I mean, he's been here for years and years, right. And he's still going strong. He's 72, and he's still a great player. I mean, he probably, it was amazing. I talked to Eli Ilestra. We were playing deep in the mixed event, and it seemed like Doyle never got a run going.
Right.
But he was just hanging in there and hanging in there and hanging in there, and it seems like it was impossible to get rid of him. I mean, he just knows how to play all the games. He's been around for a long time.
And he's motivated.
He knows how to deal with the young internet bucks who just push on the raise button all the time. So I mean, but there's also a difference winning a bracelet in 1985 and in 2008. I mean, fields are much bigger, and the average player is much better. So nowadays, picking up a lot of World Series of Poker bracelets, it's very tough. I mean, Alan Cunningham and Phil Ivey has done pretty good picking up 4 or 5 in the last couple of years.
Won 3 years in a row bracelet.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously a very strong performance from them, and I would love to catch up, but I don't play quite as many tournaments as the other. I still think of No Limit Hold'em tournaments as my strongest. That's where I can really make a mark. So
you think it's just the way the chips have fallen, or is there something about the World Series structures or tournaments that's different? Because you've won everything else. You've won the Aussie Millions and WPT. So
I think the structure is fairly comparable. I mean, there might be slight differences in the way they start out the tournament. Maybe they start a little slower, but as the tournament progresses, they're very comparable. So I don't think it should be that much of a difference. I think maybe the motivation is a tad bit different. I mean, if we take another Mr. 11, Phil Hellmuth, he has won, let's see, a World Series of Poker bracelet, and no, he's not winning anything else. No, he did win the NBC Heads Up, but he's very motivated. He would love to get number 12. I mean, so I'm sure he's down there. I've only played one tournament so far. I'm sure he's down there grinding it out, playing the $1,000 rebuy, playing the 1,500 tournaments, and whereas I'm probably more motivated to play 10,000 World Poker Tour or 10,000 Euro European Poker Tour event. That's more up my alley. So I think the motivation also means quite a bit.
Phil defines his whole being as a man by bracelets.
Yeah.
And you might be a little more well-rounded.
And he orients his whole year towards the World Series. He prepares physically for it and schedule-wise, and this is the focus of. Yeah, I think he really.
Have you seen his torso?
He trains himself to really be in good shape for the World Series. I mean,
relatively good.
It's all relative. It's all relative.
It's true. It's all relative. So no, definitely. I mean, like you said, he prepares himself for the World Series. Even though I'm definitely focused on the World Series, but I'm not going to play as many tournaments, and I'm not going to be extra motivated just because it says WSOP or EPT or whatever the letters is combined with a tournament. So,
Do you happen to know how many $10,000 main events you've played, World Poker Tour main events? Because your record there is spectacular, and
I don't know. I know the first year I played 3 and won 2, so that was good.
that's pretty good.
And
You failed in one.
Since then, it's been all downhill from there.
You know,
I've done pretty good. I don't know how many I've played. I would think I'm averaging maybe like 4 a year, maybe a tad bit more, maybe 5. So that means I don't know. I've played probably like close to 30 of them or something.
I mean,
like
given
that.
the size of the fields
Right.
and the quality of those fields,
It's incredible.
You've won 3. You finished second in the World Poker Tour Championship this year, so you just missed a 4th in the biggest one. You've made another final table in Spain recently. Your record in those is, I mean, I liken it to Stu Ungar's record, where he won 10 of 30, but when fields were much smaller, big buy-in, no limit events.
That's the famous thing Mike Sexton always brings up, that Stu Unger played 30 10K or bigger events and won 10 of them, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, under any circumstances. And the fields now are just tremendously bigger and deeper too. I mean, people really know how to play no limit.
That couldn't be done now,
There were people
but-
who didn't know how to play no limit who were playing those events.
I think your record is similar.
You said a really interesting thing, which was that Doyle knows how to deal with these really aggressive internet guys, which is phenomenal to his credit. I mean, you obviously know how to deal with them too, or at least you've got some idea. What is it that Doyle does? What is it that you do? Because that's the predominant style now. It's this kind of
It is
aggressive
definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say I was the one that started it all, but I think the way tournaments are played on the internet is definitely what has made these young, aggressive, just push the raise button
Yep.
kind of players. But I think I was one of the first one when poker really started on TV that kind of did some aggressive raising. Maybe not so many crazy all-ins on the river,
Right.
total bluff, but just continuously stabbing, raising,
a lot of
small
hands.
raise, small raise, a little bit here and there. So I kind of started out like that. I would say I had evolved a little bit as a poker player, because if I take myself 5 years ago, I feel like I didn't really have a reverse. I had this gear, and I was going that way, and I was going continuously that way.
No defense.
And yeah, basically, offense is the best defense. That was, but the last couple of years, I feel I've still have that mode. Not quite as crazy, but I've just a little bit smarter at picking my spots. Because 5 years ago, I might have picked any spot and just go full speed ahead. And it might work sometimes, but
How do you counter the guys who are still playing that full speed ahead? I mean, you've been in their heads, so you've got an idea of.
The thing to me, which I probably did, I think the way I did it 5 years ago was more successful, just because people weren't used to it.
You
people
were the first one they ever saw doing this.
Yeah.
Guys look shell-shocked,
Yeah, so nowadays people are more prepared for it. I know Doyle's style. He's very trappy, and sometimes people just give him all their money. I mean, they raised an early position, and now he calls in middle position with 2 aces, and just let's see what's happened. This guy is likely to fire 1, 2, 3 bullets, and I'm just gonna play it for all my stack. If he hits 2 pair or better, all the luck to him, but chances are he might have a fucking ace-9 offsuit.
Yeah, he may be trying that.
And he might be in a lot of pain against my 2 aces. So he plays a lot of a trapping style, and sometimes he just gets all their money. I personally I still like to be aggressive against the aggressive. If I know it's a guy or a girl who raises and then raise again and then raise again, I like to re-raise and say, hey, I really don't believe you, and most of the time you should not believe them, and then you might pick up a profit without risking too much. So, I mean, there's definitely different styles, and me and Doyle are very different, but I think we still have a reasonably good idea of how to deal with it, even though we do it in different ways.
Gus, you're also, I believe, willing to call a huge bet if you think the equities are right and if you think you can eliminate a dangerous opponent. I guess that segues into your fantastic book, Every Hand Revealed, because that just reminded me of a hand you played against Paul Wasika, where you had to make a tremendous call. Do you recall the hand?
Yeah.
So you're willing to also call when you don't have, certainly, the nuts.
Yeah.
Can you describe this hand?
Well, I can describe that hand, even though that was like a crazy, crazy hand. I mean, basically we're playing five-handed poker, a feature they have in the Australian that I really like, where they go down to six-handed from 36 players and on, and I really like that feature. It's done in the San Jose Bay 1-on-1 tournament, and people experimented. They have it here at the World Series, the six-handed event. Just start out six-handed. I really like that feature. It gives a different view than the nine-handed and so on. And basically, we're playing five-handed, and I look down. I have an ace-6. It seems like a reasonable hand. Five-handed. It's probably the only ace out, and so I raise.
Ace-6 is the new ace-8.
And basically, Paul Wasika calls in the blind. It could be pretty much any two cards, barring the really, really weak holdings. And flop comes 8-7-5. He checks, as most people do, to the razor, and hey, it's a up and down straight draw.
Yeah, with an overcard.
With an overcard.
It came well for you.
And basically, it seems like a standard bet. I could have bet more. I could have bet less. I could have even opted to move all in. We were somewhat deep, but not too deep. And
you were two of the big chip leaders too. I mean, that's one of the key things here, because
we were big in,
when you're the two
chips.
chip leaders, a lot of times you're going to be wary and cautious with each other, which makes this hand even more interesting, I think.
Yeah, and out of the blue, I made a standard bet, a little more than half the pot, and then he moved all in, and I was just like very surprised. And even though I was aware, I had seen a couple of moves from Paul Wasika that definitely was all-in moves, also without the nuts. I think it's safe to say.
Right.
So basically, now it was kind of down to what kind of hands are we talking about. Basically, I wasn't sure. I had a lot of different holdings in my mind, and most holdings I would definitely have outs. I mean, I never figured him to have a 6-9, basically a mate straight. I mean, that seemed like a very strange move.
That's the only real doomsday scenario.
Yeah, and even sets were fairly unlikely.
Yeah.
The real killer hands was the pair with a 6, with a 6-7 and the 6-8.
Which seems like the most likely. You know, at least from a normal player, the most likely hand to play that way is a pair and a draw. Maybe a gut shot and a draw, but something like that.
And basically
or a gut shot and a pair, I mean.
Yeah, the 9-8, the 9-7.
Right.
But the 9-8, 9-7, I can hit my up and down straight. I can hit my overlay ace, so I definitely still have outs. And then I thought that the total semi-bluff, which would be like a Jack-9.
Yeah.
Jack-9 is actually an open-ended straight draw. Even a king-9, just, hey, I'm going to push you off this hand. Suddenly, against a king-9, my ace-6 looks mighty, mighty fine. And basically, I just went forth and back in my head. And mind you, any other player, I would have just folded. First of all, any other player, there would be more substance behind an all-in raise. But I'd seen some crazy moves from Mr. Wasika before, so I just said there's too many semi-bluffs out there where I actually have the best hand and the best draw. And as it turned out, it was actually a very funny conversation that kind of came after that. I called and he said, "You got me," and I said, "I don't think so."
Right.
And ace high. Me too. And then he turned over the hand that I hadn't figured out.
Right.
I mean, the ace jack suited. Where did that come from? I mean, I was just like, he could have moved all in before the flop.
Right.
I would have just folded instantly. He could have re-raised before the flop. I probably would have folded instantly as well. And here he came up with a total bluff.
Right.
Where it's like I was totally, but as it turned out, it was right on the money with the pot odds I was getting. I needed 40%, and I had it exactly around 40%. So it kind of turned out as a funny hand, and it came straight.
Yes,
So I mean, we split the pot, which kind of seemed like a fair outcome, but a very surprising play from that, and a very strange hand. But definitely, I'm not afraid to call this. This was a little over the top. I probably, if I'd been in that spot again, I might have just elected to fold. But I think in general, just before the flop, I'm willing to call raises with strange hands, even out of position, just because I generally believe that the flop is a big part of the game.
What's crazy about the hand to me is that more than almost any top player, you've got the reputation for being willing to call for a lot of chips, for all your chips. So you've got to figure that that's in his mind. He knows that you're a guy liable to call. So taking it to the next level, you have to figure, well, if he's really putting so many chips in against someone who is liable to call, he has to have factored in that, he's going to need a hand that can win, that can hold up.
I see what you're saying. I will say at the point in time, that did not enter my mind, but in other occasions, it has definitely entered my mind, and I will say, many a times when I make that big call, even though they should know that I'm willing to make the big call and therefore should have a big, I look down and they still have a f***ed up hand.
Right.
I mean, so it seems like I understand your thinking, but it does not seem to hold true, actually.
No.
Of course, there's some times where I didn't call, or where I did call, where I was in a lot of trouble and end up losing the hand and this and that. But over the years, it seems like it doesn't quite hold true, actually.
But to me, that's one of the interesting things. I mean, you talked about how you've had a huge influence on how people play, which I agree. But there were players before you, like Stu Unger, who played a lot of hands and were very aggressive. But in the 80s and the 90s even, aggressive players would win a lot of tournaments because people were just not willing to call unless they had a very strong hand. And guys took advantage of this. And on TV, I remember watching you and really being influenced by you, thinking, wow, you'd figure out the range of hands, you'd figure out that you had positive equity, and you make some very, seemingly long calls that, most guys would never make. I remember what hand on TV against Antonio, where you called, you'd made a big bet, now he moved in, you had like a 10 high, but you just figured that you had enough live cards and draws to make the call correct. And now, it's a whole different story. Even in the main event, people are calling with relatively weak hands because they figure, I'm getting a little the best of it. Phil Hellmuth would tell you, if you don't have like a 4-1 advantage, I'm going to wait for a better spot. When I do,
Yeah.
It's a really.
But
thing.
the thing is, I mean, you can't take it from Phil Hellmuth. Incredibly good results. He's obviously a great tournament player. I think he is one of the best, if not the best, at playing in this field and figuring out some of the weaker opponents.
Yeah.
I don't think he's the top player if you take strong fields. Mm-hmm. I think he comes under a lot of pressure. But in weaker fields, he's very good at figuring out who is the weaker spot, how can I take advantage of that. Yeah. So, and that's why he is in that range. I want to wait for a better spot. But when you are in tough fields with a lot of people raising, you can't afford to wait for a better spot. You have to take your 55-45 shot, if it's even that good. Or sometimes you think that's also the problem. Sometimes you're going to wait for that 4-1 spot, but it ends up being the other way because you have queens, and that was what you waited for. But the other guy had kings, and now you're a 4-1 underdog, and that's the spot you waited for. I mean, that doesn't seem too smart. So it's always tough to wait for the right spot. But obviously, he does a lot of things well. And he figures out his opponents and waits for a good spot. But against tough opponents, it's hard.
Against tough opponents, when you're the big favorite, they're going to get away a lot of times.
Right. Yeah.
But Phil does rely on the guy who just comes out for the World Series of Poker once a year, and he's won 11 bracelets doing that, because otherwise it's impossible to figure out how he wins using that style.
And the other problem with waiting for the right spot is that against good players, even if you do get it in with the best of it, you've been knocked so down
you're so
that
low.
all you do is go from having, a quarter of the average chips to half the average chips or something
And
like
then
that.
if you're so low, you take one beat, you'll be out. But
Yeah,
Phil
yeah.
makes his living off
maybe,
bad players, which is great. I mean, he's done-
Maybe there's something to this whole dichotomy of Phil winning all the World Series bracelets, Gus not having won a World Series bracelet. You're winning a lot of these 25K events or tough, shorter field events, the Aussie Millions or whatever, and Phil not winning.
No, no.
everything
I
else.
mean, it's
a little simplified,
definitely,
but there's something.
It's
in
definitely.
front
I think. I mean, there's definitely the motivation factor. If he really aims for the 12th bracelet, would I aim for? I'd much rather than winning a bracelet. I mean, obviously the tournament I would like to win is, for me, the main event. The main event, I mean, people can say the horse is blah, blah, this and that, but the main event is the main event, and that's a reasoning it's called the main event. It's because it's the biggest event, it's the biggest field, it's the biggest prize. It's just the biggest tournament. So obviously that's the one to win as far as I'm concerned, and it would give me a bracelet.
The horse event is 3 years old. The main event is over 30 years of history. It's worth
so
something.
I mean that's
Yeah.
that is really the big one. But if I had to choose between winning the $1,000 rebuy event or a big European Poker Tour event or World Poker Tour event,
Or the Aussie Millions.
I would take one of those instead of winning. But Phil would rather win the 1,000 rebuy, but
And a lot
I
of
would
people-
rather
a lot
win
of
the
people-
1.5 million first prize than the 417 first prize.
I'm with you.
So I mean that's me. But obviously having the 12th bracelet would add a little bit to his self-made legacy. No, sorry about
Have
that.
you ever seen the movie Patton?
Patton.
There's a scene, it's about the American general George Patton, and he's overlooking the battlefield in Africa against Rommel, and and he knows what Rommel's going to do, and he says out loud, as if speaking to Rommel, "You magnificent bastard, I read your book," and that's how I feel about you now. Because your book is like the greatest thing I've ever read in my life. I really enjoyed it. I read it cover to cover like the day it came out. First of all, the reaction's been very positive, I imagine. It's flying off the shelves. So you may never have to win another tournament because the book's just going to take care of you.
Well, that would be nice.
You're gonna have to sell a lot of copies to overcome the tournament results.
Yeah, that's for sure.
When you first came up with this idea, it's called Every Hand Revealed, and you virtually reveal every hand you played in the Aussie Millions, which fortuitously you won. What were you going to do if you didn't win a tournament for a year while you were doing the project? Because that could happen even in the greatest player.
Well, that could easily happen. I mean, I would say I've definitely had a couple of stabs at it.
Yeah.
I've done it for two World Poker Tours at the Bellagio, where it came in like 21st and 17th.
Right.
And that's just not good enough.
Not enough.
That's not going to sell books.
No, I mean
The story of my 17th place final.
yeah, and I did last year for the World Series a lot of
Every hand revealed
interest-
until the final two tables.
Right.
a lot of interesting hands, but I got knocked out in 61st.
See, I would still be interested in that, but I'm
but I'm so embarrassed because I really made two horrible plays at the end, which obviously I also did in the Aussie Millions. I mean, basically, my line for writing a book, which definitely preferable would be if I won the tournament, but really would be have to play the tournament to the end. So second place,
Sure.
because second place. Yeah, I stumbled in the end, but I would have played
still
all
played
the
every hand,
hands. So,
right.
so
Just as
basically,
interesting.
all my decision-making process till the end would have been there. So, which might explain, because I'm actually, which I also mentioned in the book, I'm kind of unhappy with the way I played three-handed, where I kind of let Jimmy Fricke take over. But I think somewhat lurking in my mind is that it was important for me to get to second spot, so I think I played overly cautious. Some could call that overly cautious, just playing bad. But anyway, whatever you prefer to call it,
There's no need for us to label.
I think I made some silly mistakes three-handed, but I think that might have been lurking in my mind. But of course,
It's
that's
a
an
valid
easy
reason,
excuse.
but that's like how some people play the money bubble, which you would never slow down there.
Yeah.
In fact, you speed up there. But you had this important project bubble.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you mention in the book quite a bit about the ladder principle and how important it is to let other people knock themselves out, not to, if you're in the right position chip-wise, not to foolishly go out when the money changes a lot. And I hadn't really thought about that, but three-handed, not only does the money change a lot, which you keep mentioning as you kind of lay down some hands and don't play back in spots where you were earlier in the tournament, but yeah, if you've also got this issue of finishing in the final two for the book, that could really impact you. Fortunately, Andy Black, who was a third guy, he didn't know that. If he knew that, he really could have exploited it even more.
He could have. I mean, it seemed like. I would say if I had to describe right here and now the three-handed play, I would say both me and Andy dogged it a little bit, and credit to Jimmy for taking advantage of it, because I think in some of the hands that I don't know what he was holding, but I think there was a lot of poor holdings where he just raised and took it away. He kind of rolled over, and I laid down too much, but it seemed like Andy did it too.
I probably wouldn't. It's funny, being in Jimmy's situation with that many chips, I would have assumed that you're not worried about moving up to second. You've won a lot of tournaments. You've had a great couple of years. You played a win, and I probably would have been cautious, thinking, Gus is not like most players who can be exploited in this situation, who are trying to move up that one spot and win another 400,000, I think it was, whatever the difference was between third and second, 300. So that probably, I don't know if it surprised him or he just didn't even, just kind of win.
Well, I think, basically, I think a lot of players make the mistake, which I try not to do, but it's kind of like you're sitting at a table, you have 9-handed table, 8 players, they all seem very tight, and you're taking advantage of it, and you raise one time and it works, and you raise another time and it works, and you raise another time and it works. Of course, you have to keep some balance. I mentioned that in the book. I don't want to make it too obvious to everybody, because there was definitely tables in the Austin Millions where I kind of was steamrolling along, raising a lot of hands, but I didn't want to do it too much. But sometimes I think Jimmy kind of went by saying, well, I raised, it worked. I raised, it worked. I raised, it worked. Why on earth should I stop?
Right.
I mean, and really, there's definitely a valid point to why should I stop? It just worked 1, 2, 3, and I will say, I'm definitely, that's I tend to be a little more cautious against these guys. They've raised once, they've raised twice, and now I think, hey, it's the third time. He might have it here the third time. Right. So now I'm a little cautious again, sure. and really, I think he just went along with it. Hey, it's worked so far. Let's just keep on rolling.
Thanks for joining us on The Scoop. Gus Hansen has brought us a lot of stuff. We're going to bring him back tomorrow for part 2, and look for the new episode on Card Player TV.
2 bracelets. Awesome.
Well, these aren't easy to win. I remember this one like it was yesterday. My opponent had me down to my left. Sorry. Anyway, it's down to my last few chips. So, I had to call.
We play at FullTailPoker.com.